The air in the room was cold, not from the air conditioning, but from the kind of chill that comes when people look at you like you don't belong. Naomi stood at the end of the long glass conference table, holding her laptop close to her chest. Around her, a group of well-dressed executives whispered, exchanged glances, and smirked. She'd been invited to the meeting by an assistant who thought she was just another consultant. No one in that room knew who she really was. "Can you make sure the coffee's hot next time?" one of the men joked as she entered. His name was Richard Holt, senior partner, mid-50s, silver hair, expensive suit, and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. Naomi smiled politely. "I'm not here to serve coffee." "Oh," Richard chuckled. "My mistake. You're one of the junior reps from Greenstone, right? You can set up in the corner while we wait for the owner to arrive." That line, "while we wait for the owner to arrive," hung in the air. Naomi hesitated, lips parting, but she said nothing. Because sometimes silence speaks louder than pride. She took a seat quietly, opened her laptop, and began reviewing her notes. The meeting room was on the 30th floor of a downtown Atlanta skyscraper, glass walls showing the entire city. The skyline glittered with sunlight. Yet, inside that room, Naomi felt like she was standing under a shadow. She'd built something from nothing, from her small one-bedroom apartment, with an old laptop and a stubborn dream. But none of these people knew that. Not yet. Today's meeting was supposed to finalize a partnership deal. Her company, BrightPath Solutions, had been approached by Greenstone Capital, a large investment firm, for a merger. What they didn't know was that she was the founder and CEO of BrightPath. And when the time came to introduce herself, Naomi wanted to see what people looked like before they realized who she was. So she waited. The door opened again. A few more men entered, laughing about a golf tournament. One of them, a tall guy in a navy suit, glanced at her and frowned. "Are we seriously doing open invites now?" he whispered to Richard, not even trying to hide it. Richard smirked. "Don't worry. She's not one of us." Naomi could have stood up right then. She could have corrected them, said who she was, the woman whose signature they were waiting for, the person who owned the company they were trying to buy into. But she didn't. Because Naomi had learned something over the years: you can't teach respect to those who think they already own it. The meeting began. PowerPoint slides. Buzzwords. A lot of talking, very little listening. Richard dominated the conversation, as he always did. He stood at the head of the table, showing graphs about market expansion and synergy potential. Every time Naomi tried to contribute, he cut her off. "Thanks, sweetheart, but we'll handle the numbers," he said at one point, waving his hand dismissively. She simply nodded. She wasn't angry. Not yet. Just disappointed. It wasn't the first time she'd been treated this way. In college, when she spoke up in group projects, they'd ignored her until her idea worked, then someone else took credit. In her first job, she trained a man who was later promoted above her. When she started her company, investors told her she was too soft-spoken for leadership. But Naomi never argued with them. She just worked. And today, after 5 years of building BrightPath from her kitchen table to a 7-figure business, she'd walked into this room not for validation, but for a choice, whether to partner with these people or walk away. Halfway through the presentation, Richard looked at her again. "Miss, what was your name again?" he asked, pretending to care. "Naomi Brooks." "Right. Miss Brooks. Can you run out and grab a few more copies of the proposal for us?" The room chuckled softly. Naomi's jaw tightened, but her eyes stayed calm. "I don't work for you," she said quietly. The laughter grew louder. "Then what do you do, Miss Brooks?" another voice asked. Naomi took a slow breath. "I'm here for the meeting." Sure you are, Richard said, sarcasm dripping from his voice. You'll understand if we keep this between the actual partners. Naomi looked around the room, at the people laughing, at the ones pretending not to notice. Then she gently closed her laptop, stood up, and smiled. Well, she said softly, the actual partner you're waiting for might not appreciate how you're speaking to me. Richard crossed his arms. And who might that be? Naomi didn't answer. She gathered her things, slid her laptop into her bag, and walked toward the door. As she reached the handle, she paused and looked back. I'll give you a moment, she said. My lawyer will explain the rest. Then she left the room. Behind her, silence fell, heavy and confused. The laughter stopped. Someone whispered, "Lawyer?" "What lawyer?" Richard frowned. Who does she think she is? But before anyone could answer, the door opened again. A tall black man in a dark suit stepped inside. Calm. Measured. A briefcase in his hand. Good morning, he said. I'm here on behalf of Ms. Naomi Brooks, owner and CEO of BrightPath Solutions. The entire room froze. And Richard forgot how to breathe. When Naomi was a little girl, she used to sit on the front porch of her grandmother's house in Savannah, Georgia, watching the world go by. Her grandmother would sit beside her, shelling peas or humming church songs, and every now and then she'd say something Naomi never forgot. Child, don't let the world tell you how small you are. Just let your work do the talking. Naomi didn't fully understand those words back then. But as life went on, she learned exactly what they meant. Naomi was always curious. While other kids were watching cartoons, she was sketching little business ideas in her school notebooks, logos, slogans, even plans for companies that existed only in her imagination. In high school, she built her first website. Not for herself, but for a local bakery owned by an older woman named Miss Lila, who couldn't afford fancy marketing. Naomi did it for free, just because she believed small businesses deserved a fair chance to shine. The site went viral in their small town, and Miss Lila's bakery started booming. For the first time, Naomi saw the power of technology, and the satisfaction of lifting others up. She decided then that she wanted to create something bigger than herself. But life didn't make it easy. Naomi earned a scholarship to a state university in Atlanta. She majored in business and computer science, often being one of the few black women in her classes. She was quiet, observant, and brilliant, but people rarely noticed. Professors praised her group projects, but the credit often went to louder voices. Classmates called her soft-spoken as if it were a flaw. During her junior year, Naomi interned at a tech firm downtown. On her first day, someone mistook her for a receptionist. On her second, they asked her to fetch coffee. By the third day, she had designed a prototype that saved the company thousands of dollars, but her manager presented it as his own. When she confronted him, he smiled. That's just how the game works, Naomi. You'll learn. That sentence burned into her mind. You'll learn. Yes, she would. But not the way he thought. After graduation, Naomi worked for 2 more firms. Each time, she hit the same invisible ceiling. No matter how hard she worked, how many late nights she pulled, she was never quite ready for promotion. One night, sitting alone in her tiny apartment, surrounded by bills and rejection emails, she opened her laptop and stared at a blank page. She typed 2 words, BrightPath. That was the beginning. At first, it was just Naomi in a dream, helping small businesses build a presence online. She didn't have funding, fancy software, or a team. Just heart, discipline, and long nights that bled into dawn. She built websites, wrote code, and answered client emails herself. Some days she couldn't even afford to keep the lights on. But she kept going. She believed that one day, her work would speak louder than her voice ever could. And slowly, it did. A small bakery in Chicago. A barber shop in Houston. A daycare in Detroit. One client at a time, word began to spread. Her quiet little company started gaining attention. Within 3 years, Bright Path Solutions had clients in over 20 states. Naomi hired a small team, people like her, who had been underestimated elsewhere. She built a culture of respect, patience, and integrity, values she'd never found in the places that rejected her. But success came with new challenges. When Bright Path hit its first $1 million milestone, the calls started coming. Big firms. Investment groups. People who saw dollar signs but not people. They spoke to Naomi in polished voices, with words like synergy, scaling potential, and strategic acquisition. But beneath the compliments, Naomi could hear it, the disbelief. They couldn't believe that she had built it. At networking events, they'd ask, "So, who's the real owner?" At conferences, they'd assume she was an assistant. Even the business magazine that featured her company used the wrong photo in print, showing a white man in a suit next to the headline, "The Bright Path Visionary." Naomi didn't even bother to correct them. She just smiled, closed the magazine, and went back to work. Because she wasn't building a company to be seen. She was building it to last. Then came Greenstone Capital. Greenstone was one of Atlanta's biggest private equity firms, known for buying out growing businesses, restructuring them, and flipping them for profit. They reached out with what sounded like an opportunity, a partnership that could expand Bright Path's reach nationally. At first, Naomi was cautious. She knew deals like that often came with strings attached. But when their senior partner, Richard Holt, personally requested a meeting, she agreed to hear them out. He seemed polite at first, charming, even. He praised her company, admired her story. Then came the subtle digs. "How hands-on are you really? Do you have someone advising you on business strategy? Most women entrepreneurs I meet prefer creative roles, not the tough decisions." Naomi just nodded and listened. Inside, she was taking notes. When Richard invited her to the official boardroom meeting to finalize discussions, Naomi decided to attend, quietly. She didn't tell them who she was. She wanted to see their true colors. And now, after the laughter, after the snide remarks, after the way they spoke to her like she didn't belong, their colors were clear. Back in the hallway, after leaving that meeting, Naomi leaned against the cool glass wall and took a breath. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't angry. Just steady, like a calm before rain. Her lawyer, Jordan Pierce, was waiting near the elevator. He was tall, composed, and had been with her since the early days of Bright Path, back when no one else believed in her. "You ready?" he asked quietly. Naomi nodded. "They've shown me everything I needed to see." Jordan smiled slightly. "Then let's go remind them who they're talking to." As he walked into the boardroom, Naomi stayed outside for a moment, watching through the glass. She could see the confusion spreading across their faces as Jordan introduced himself. She could see Richard's smirk falter, the others glance nervously at one another. Naomi didn't need to be in there for the fireworks. She'd already said everything she needed to. What mattered now was that they understood, respect isn't given because of your title. It's earned by how you treat people. As she waited in the hallway, Naomi remembered the first day she registered her company name at the small business office. The clerk had looked at her skeptically and said, "You sure you want to do this alone?" And now, years later, she stood outside a glass-walled boardroom 30 floors above Atlanta, listening to her lawyer explain to those men that the woman they mocked owned every % of what they were begging to buy into. She smiled softly. Her grandmother's words echoed again in her heart. Don't let the world tell you how small you are. Let your work do the talking. And right now, her work was speaking volumes. Richard sat stiffly in his chair as Jordan placed a stack of documents on the table. "Gentlemen," Jordan said evenly, "Bright Path Solutions is not a subsidiary of Greenstone. It's a fully independent company, owned and operated by Ms. Naomi Brooks. This meeting was called under the assumption of mutual respect and transparency. Two things, I'm afraid, were missing today." The silence was thick. Someone cleared their throat. We didn't realize." "That much is clear," Jordan replied. "Ms. Brooks will not be proceeding with any partnership under these conditions. But she thanks you for your time." Richard's jaw clenched. His silver confidence had turned to ash. He tried to recover, offering a handshake that Jordan ignored. As Jordan gathered his papers, he added one more thing, and for future reference, next time a woman walks into your boardroom, try assuming she earned her place there. Then he turned and left. Naomi didn't even look back when the door opened. She just pushed away from the wall, adjusted her blazer, and walked toward the elevator. Not triumphant. Not smug. Just at peace. Because real power doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. The elevator doors slid shut, and Naomi finally exhaled. The city below stretched out like a map of everything she had built, glittering lights, busy streets, dreams in motion. Atlanta had tested her, broken her, and made her stronger than she ever thought she could be. But she didn't smile. Not yet. Because she knew that when people like Richard Holt got embarrassed, they didn't take it quietly. They got angry. And sometimes, they got dangerous. By the next morning, Naomi's assistant, Jade, rushed into her office, tablet in hand and eyes wide. "Naomi, you need to see this." Naomi looked up from her computer. "What's wrong?" Jade handed over the tablet. The headline on a business blog read, "Greenstone Capital meeting ends abruptly after mistaken identity mix-up." Below it, an anonymous source had leaked that Greenstone executives had unknowingly insulted the CEO of Bright Path Solutions during a deal negotiation. The article didn't name names, but anyone in the industry could connect the dots. Naomi sighed. "So it's already out there." Jade frowned. "Should we release a statement?" Naomi shook her head. "No. Let the noise pass." That was her style, quiet strength. She didn't believe in clapping back or feeding drama. She believed in truth revealing itself over time. But Greenstone wasn't so quiet. Within hours, a spokesperson for the firm released a statement calling it a miscommunication and insisting that all interactions with Bright Path were handled professionally. Naomi read it, then smiled faintly. Of course they'd say that. Meanwhile, across town, in Greenstone's gleaming office tower, Richard Holt was pacing his office like a storm contained in a suit. "How the hell did this leak?" he barked. His assistant looked terrified. "We're not sure, sir. Maybe someone from the board meeting." "Find out who." "Now." He slammed a folder on his desk. "Do you realize how bad this looks? They think I laughed at the CEO of a black-owned tech firm during a partnership deal." His voice dripped with more fear of bad press than remorse. His partner, a younger executive named Craig, leaned against the wall. "Maybe we should just apologize publicly." Richard glared at him. "Apologize? For what? Being misled?" She didn't even introduce herself. Craig hesitated. "She didn't have to. You assumed." Richard's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being called out, especially not by people he considered beneath him. "Schedule a call with her lawyer," he said finally. "We're not ending this deal. Not like this." But what Richard didn't know was that Naomi had already made her decision. That afternoon, Naomi sat in her office surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows and the soft hum of city life. She had built this place, every desk, every computer, every dream inside it, from scratch. Jade stood by her desk again, hesitant. Richard's office called. They want to reschedule the meeting, to clear things up. Naomi's pen paused midair. Clear things up? That's what they said. Naomi thought for a long moment. Then she leaned back in her chair. Tell them I'm unavailable indefinitely. Jade smiled. You got it. Naomi went back to her paperwork, calm as ever. But inside, a quiet storm was brewing, not anger, but a deep, powerful clarity. People like Richard wanted her to react emotionally so they could label her difficult. But she refused to give them that satisfaction. She wasn't going to fight them in the press or demand public apologies. Her victory would be quieter and far more lasting. She would outgrow them. Over the next week, whispers filled the industry. Some said Naomi had overreacted. Others claimed Greenstone was looking into diversity training. A few even suggested she had planned the whole thing as a publicity stunt. Naomi ignored them all. She knew the truth, and that was enough. Still, one afternoon, her friend and mentor, Marcus Ellison, dropped by her office. Marcus was a retired entrepreneur who had once faced similar prejudice when he was building his own company years ago. He leaned on the doorframe and smiled. I heard you shook up a boardroom last week. Naomi laughed softly. You could say that. Marcus sat down across from her. You handled it better than most would. But I know what's coming next. Naomi raised an eyebrow. What's that? The tests. The silent punishments. The doors that were open before might start closing. They'll try to freeze you out quietly. It's how they keep control. Naomi nodded slowly. I know. But I'm not afraid of closed doors. I've built new ones before. Marcus smiled with pride. That's what I wanted to hear. A few days later, something unexpected happened. A small business podcast reached out, asking to interview Naomi about her journey as a woman entrepreneur. They didn't want to talk about Greenstone, just her story. She agreed. During the interview, she spoke plainly and humbly. Sometimes people laugh at you because they don't understand your purpose. But if you stay focused, your success will be the loudest answer you ever give. The clip went viral. Not because it was fiery or dramatic, but because it was calm, dignified, and deeply real. People saw something rare in Naomi, power wrapped in humility. Emails poured in from women across the country, young founders, students, mothers, thanking her for being an example. One message stood out. It read, I watched them laugh at you, and you still smiled. You reminded me that grace can be power too. Naomi reread that message several times, tears filling her eyes. This, not the money, not the deals, this was the real reward. Meanwhile, Greenstone Capital began to feel the consequences of their arrogance. A few of their clients quietly pulled out of contracts. A few potential partners chose to reassess future deals. Nothing explosive, just quiet withdrawals, the kind of silence that speaks volumes. The business world might not have shouted about it, but they noticed. Behind closed doors, Richard faced increasing pressure from his board. Your reputation is costing us, one executive told him bluntly during a tense meeting. Richard's face went pale. I've been with this firm for 20 years. And you might not last 21, another interrupted. He slammed his pen on the table. So what do you want me to do? Go beg her forgiveness? No one answered. But in that silence, he realized, yes, that's exactly what they wanted. A week later, Naomi was in her office reviewing design drafts when Jade peeked in. Naomi, "You have a visitor." Naomi looked up. "Who?" Jade hesitated. "Richard Holt." For a brief second, Naomi's pen froze. Then she placed it down gently. "Send him in." Richard entered looking nothing like the man who had mocked her in the boardroom. His suit was still sharp, but his confidence had cracks. "Ms. Brooks," he began softly. "I owe you an apology." Naomi gestured for him to sit. "Go ahead." He sighed heavily. "What happened that day, it wasn't professional. I misjudged you, and it was wrong. I hope you can understand that it wasn't personal." Naomi interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "It was personal to me." He looked down. She continued, "You didn't just doubt my position. You doubted my worth. And that's the part you can't write off as business." Richard nodded slowly. "You're right. I was wrong. I hope we can still do business together someday." Naomi studied him carefully. Then she smiled, small but genuine. "Mr. Holt," she said, "there's no need for anger or resentment. I forgive you. But Bright Path will never be for sale." Her tone wasn't cruel, it was final. Richard stood up, nodded, and left quietly. As the door closed, Jade walked back in. "That felt good, didn't it?" Naomi smiled faintly. "It felt necessary." That night, Naomi sat by her window, watching the city lights flicker against the dark sky. Her phone buzzed with notifications, new clients, new partnerships, people who wanted to work with her because they respected not just her business, but her values. She looked at a framed photo of her grandmother on the shelf and whispered, "You were right, Grandma. The work spoke for me." And it had. The world now knew who she was, not because she shouted, not because she sought revenge, but because she carried herself with grace when others tried to drag her down. The next morning, the city woke up to headlines that made waves in Atlanta's business circles. Greenstone faces scrutiny over alleged bias in failed Bright Path deal. The story came from a credible source, the Atlanta Business Ledger, and this time, there were details. Someone from inside Greenstone had spoken up, confirming the disrespect Naomi endured during that meeting. The article quoted employees who had witnessed Richard's behavior, describing the laughter, the dismissive tone, and the way Naomi had quietly walked out before sending her lawyer in. And now, there it was, in black and white for the entire world to read. Naomi hadn't said a single word publicly. But her silence had done all the talking. In her office that morning, Naomi sat at her desk with a cup of tea, scanning through the article. Jade entered with a nervous smile. "You've seen it?" Naomi nodded. "Yes. What do we do?" "Nothing," Naomi said simply. "We stay professional. Always." Jade frowned. "You don't want to at least make a statement?" Naomi looked out the window, the morning sunlight catching her face. "They've already said what needed to be said, and I didn't have to say a word." Her tone was peaceful, but her eyes told a deeper story, a quiet satisfaction, not born from revenge, but from justice naturally unfolding. Meanwhile, chaos was brewing in Greenstone's headquarters. Richard sat in a tense meeting with the firm's legal department and senior partners. The atmosphere was thick, a mix of anger, blame, and corporate panic. "This is bad," one partner said, flipping through the printed article. "We've got board members calling for an internal review. Clients are starting to ask questions." Richard rubbed his temples. It was one meeting. One misunderstanding. "Are we really doing this?" Another partner leaned forward. "This isn't just about the meeting, Richard. It's about perception. You made the firm look arrogant, dismissive, and worse, discriminatory." Richard's jaw tightened. "We can fix this." Can you? Another asked sharply. Because right now, Naomi Brooks is being praised as a symbol of grace under fire, and we're being painted as villains. The word villains stung more than he expected. For years, Richard had prided himself on being respected, powerful, admired, untouchable. But this made him look small. He tried to speak, but the managing director cut him off. Effective immediately, you're being placed on leave while we conduct a full investigation. Richard's face went pale. You can't be serious. But they were. Later that week, Naomi's lawyer, Jordan Pierce, received a formal request from Greenstone's counsel. They wanted a private meeting to discuss potential resolution. Jordan called Naomi that evening. They're trying to settle this quietly, he said. Naomi's voice was calm. I figured they would. Do you want to meet them? She thought for a moment, then answered, yes. But only if we do it on my terms. The next afternoon, in a neutral downtown office, Naomi arrived with Jordan by her side. Waiting for them were two senior partners from Greenstone, not Richard, who had already been suspended, and their legal representative. The room was quiet, professional, and filled with tension. Ms. Brooks, one of the partners began, we want to sincerely apologize on behalf of Greenstone Capital for how you were treated. It was unacceptable. Naomi nodded politely but said nothing. The lawyer continued, we'd also like to offer a goodwill agreement, a financial settlement for any damages to your company's reputation. Naomi raised an eyebrow. Damages? My reputation hasn't been damaged. The room fell silent. Jordan smiled faintly. In fact, he said, her company's value has increased since this incident. She's received 3 partnership offers in the last week. The partners exchanged uneasy glances. Naomi leaned forward slightly. You see, gentlemen, I didn't come here for compensation. I came because I wanted to see if Greenstone learned anything from this. One of them swallowed hard. We're reviewing our internal policies. Good, Naomi said. But I don't need your apology. Just promise me you'll treat the next woman who walks into your boardroom with the respect you denied me. Her words were soft, but they cut through the room like thunder. The partners nodded slowly, genuinely. We will. Naomi stood. Then we're done here. Jordan followed her lead. As they left, the Greenstone team remained seated, silent, not defeated by her anger, but humbled by her grace. News of Greenstone's internal review spread quickly. While Naomi had refused any financial compensation, her quiet strength became the centerpiece of countless discussions about professionalism, gender bias, and respect in the corporate world. Panel discussions quoted her words. Business schools used her story as a case study. A popular blog called it the day silence won. Naomi never sought attention, but attention found her. Emails flooded in again, this time from corporate leaders and CEOs who admired how she handled the entire situation. One message came from a CEO of a major tech company. We've been watching BrightPath for a while. Your leadership is exactly what this industry needs. Let's talk. And just like that, new doors opened, doors she hadn't even knocked on. Richard Holt, meanwhile, spent his days away from the office, alone with his thoughts. For the first time in his life, he couldn't hide behind his title. He saw the damage pride could do. He watched interviews where Naomi was mentioned, calm, poised, never saying his name, never condemning him. And that silence hurt worse than any public attack ever could. One evening, he sat at his dining table, staring at an old photo of himself from his early career, young, hopeful, idealistic. He wondered when that man had turned into someone who laughed at others just to feel powerful. He finally understood that respect isn't a business strategy. It's character. And he'd lost it somewhere along the way. Months passed. BrightPath Solutions continued to grow, now operating in multiple states with new investors who believed in Naomi's vision, investors who valued humility as much as profit. Her team expanded, her platform gained recognition, and her story became a quiet revolution. But Naomi never changed. She still came in early, still checked in on her staff personally, still treated every client, big or small, with the same kindness. Because she remembered what it felt like to be underestimated. One rainy morning, Jade entered Naomi's office with a white envelope. "This came for you." Naomi opened it and found a handwritten letter. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. It was from Richard Holt. He wrote, "Ms. Brooks, I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that our meeting changed me. I've taken time to reflect on the kind of leader I became, and the kind of man I want to be. Your grace taught me something no seminar ever could. Thank you for that. Respectfully, Richard Holt." Naomi folded the letter gently, her eyes softening. She placed it in her drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that even those who hurt you can learn from you. That evening, Naomi visited her grandmother's grave in Savannah. She brought a bouquet of white lilies, her grandmother's favorite. She knelt down, brushing the rain from the engraved stone. "Grandma," she whispered, "you told me to let my work do the talking. I think it finally spoke." She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. The wind rustled the trees, and for a brief moment, it felt like her grandmother's spirit was right there beside her, proud, watching, at peace. Naomi stood, closed her umbrella, and looked up at the gray sky. The storm had passed. The rain had stopped by the time Naomi stepped out of the elevator. The glass doors of the building slid open, and she was greeted by the soft hum of the city, cars passing, distant chatter, and the faint smell of wet pavement. She took a slow breath, letting the cool air fill her lungs. The storm outside had ended, and so had the one inside. Behind her, the boardroom was in chaos. Voices raised. Papers scattered. Reputations cracking under the weight of arrogance. But Naomi didn't need to see it. She had already seen enough. Her lawyer, Marcus, caught up with her near the lobby. "They're not taking it well," he said quietly, adjusting his glasses. Naomi gave a faint smile. People rarely do when the mirror finally shows them the truth. They walked side by side to the exit, the click of her heels echoing softly. The lobby security guard, who had seen her enter hours earlier, straightened up in surprise. "Everything okay, ma'am?" Naomi nodded. "Everything's better than okay." For the first time that day, she allowed herself to breathe freely. The tension that had been pressing on her chest for weeks, the meetings, the condescension, the disrespect, all of it melted into the sound of the city around her. She wasn't angry anymore. Just grateful. Because sometimes, justice doesn't need to be loud. They reached the parking lot. Her black sedan was waiting near the edge, drops of rain glistening on its hood. Marcus opened the door for her, but she paused before getting in. "Do you think I was too quiet in there?" she asked softly. Marcus shook his head. "No. You were dignified. You didn't shout, you didn't gloat. You just let the truth walk in with you." Naomi smiled, a small, calm smile. "Good. Because I never wanted to humiliate anyone. I just wanted to remind them who they were talking to." "You did more than that," Marcus said. "You reminded them what leadership looks like." The following week, the story made its quiet rounds. No viral videos. No scandal headlines. Just whispers in professional circles, stories of a woman who owned the company they tried to control. Investors started calling BrightPath directly. Partners who had once ignored Naomi now sent polite emails, requesting a chance to collaborate. But Naomi didn't rush to reply. She took her time. In the silence of her office, she reflected on how far she'd come, the late nights, the self-doubt, the moments when she almost quit. She remembered the rejection letters that called her business too ambitious, the bankers who refused her loans because she didn't fit the typical profile of a tech founder. She remembered crying in her car after her first investor pitch, not because she'd failed, but because they'd laughed at her for dreaming too big. And yet, here she was now. Not louder. Not meaner. Just steadier. She'd learned that sometimes, the greatest revenge is peace. A few days later, Naomi received an envelope at her office, an apology letter from Richard Holt. It was short, stiff, and formal. "I regret the misunderstanding during our meeting. I hope we can find a way to move forward professionally." Naomi read it once, then folded it neatly and placed it in her drawer. She didn't reply. Because some apologies are meant to stay on paper. She didn't need validation from him, not anymore. Instead, she opened her laptop, reviewed a proposal from a community initiative she'd been quietly supporting, a fund for young women in business. "Let's sponsor 5 of them this year," she told her assistant. "Full mentorship, full support." Her assistant smiled. "That's going to make a difference." Naomi looked out the window at the skyline, where the city stretched far beyond her reflection. "That's the point," she said. Weeks passed, and Bright Path grew stronger. The merger never happened. Naomi pulled the offer completely. Instead, she took her company independent, expanding into new cities with a team that believed in her vision. Every day, she walked into her office with quiet pride, not in how others saw her, but in how she saw herself. No longer underestimated. No longer trying to prove anything. Just living her truth. One evening, she attended a networking gala. The kind filled with champagne glasses, expensive suits, and perfectly rehearsed smiles. Across the room, she spotted a familiar face, Richard, standing near a display table, talking to a small group. For a brief moment, their eyes met. He froze, looking unsure whether to approach. Naomi offered a polite nod, nothing more. Then she turned back to her conversation, her presence calm, composed, and completely unbothered. That was her victory, not in revenge, not in pride, but in peace. Later that night, as the event wrapped up, a young woman approached her. She was nervous, holding a business card between trembling fingers. "Ms. Brooks," she said softly. "I just wanted to say, your story inspired me. I saw how you handled that meeting last month. I was interning there. It changed the way I see myself." Naomi smiled, touched. "Thank you. That means a lot. I've been afraid to speak up at work," the young woman continued, "but seeing you, how calm you were, how you didn't need to shout to be heard, it gave me courage." Naomi placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Remember something," she said. "Sometimes, silence isn't weakness. It's power waiting for the right moment." The young woman nodded, eyes shining with new strength. When Naomi got home that night, she sat by her window with a cup of tea, looking out at the city lights. Everything was quiet, the good kind of quiet. She thought about how life had tested her, how people had doubted her, and how, in the end, she didn't need to prove them wrong. She just needed to keep walking her path. That was the lesson she hoped people would take, especially those who'd ever been laughed at, dismissed, or underestimated. Because sometimes, the best answer isn't shouting back. It's letting your success do the talking. And in Naomi's case, success spoke louder than any argument ever could. She smiled to herself, whispering softly, "Never let the noise drown your worth. Stay steady. Stay kind. Let time do the talking." Then she closed her laptop and turned off the light. Outside, The city glowed, full of people still learning what she had already mastered. That dignity is the quietest form of power. If you are inspired by Naomi's quiet strength, like this video to support more stories like this. Subscribe so you never miss a moment of courage and redemption. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that even when the world laughs, grace always wins in the end. This was They laughed when she said she owned the company, then her lawyer walked in. A story about quiet power, dignity, and the kind of revenge that doesn't need noise. This is Buchi Grind, stories that keep you watching.